You're going to meet the leader of a social enterprise that's embracing the energy transition. New Dawn Enterprises is dedicated to community building on the lovely Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. They own multiple properties that vary in age and size. Each come with their own energy challenge, or in this case, opportunities to transition to efficient net zero buildings. Joining me will be Erika Shea, the president and CEO of New Dawn Enterprises, who will share their inspirational renewable energy journey. Hi, Erika. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, you're coming in from the beautiful Cape Breton Island part of Nova Scotia, and I imagine it's fall, and the leaves are starting to change. I imagine it's gorgeous in your part of the province.
It's absolutely beautiful. We've had a spectacular summer, which has transitioned into a spectacular fall, and we've been really lucky so far, knock on wood, with respect to hurricane season. So we have 60 days left of hurricane season, and we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Now, you just mentioned a couple of seconds ago about transitioning and from summer to fall. And of course, we're here to talk about energy transition and how your organization has decided to become net zero. And tell everyone, your story and your journey of why you decided to do this.
Yeah, so New Dawn Enterprises is a nonprofit social enterprise that has worked in Cape Breton since 1976. And we are made up of 17 different incorporated nonprofits and charities. And each of those responds to a community need that arises over time. And one of the ways that we've always done our work going back to 1976 is through the provision of housing, affordable
Mm.
housing, attainable housing, supportive housing, transitional housing, youth housing. So we have amassed quite a portfolio. We have about $38 million in physical assets, residential, commercial, and community spaces. And so a few years ago, we really began to look at what was the climate impact of all of these buildings. Now, Cape Breton Island has been a historically poor region in the province and in the country. And one of the things that means is that there's not as frequent a turnover of our building stock. So we tend to have a lot of old buildings that are incredibly inefficient. They consume a lot of energy, and many homes and buildings here are still heated with oil, which is both expensive and not environmentally friendly. And so when we took a step back and looked at what we could do, that contemplation set us on this current path, which is transitioning all of our buildings to renewables. And that is preceded by retrofitting all of our buildings so that we can lower their energy consumption and then transition their remaining energy demand over to renewables.
Energy poverty, is definitely a concern everywhere. On an earlier podcast, we had Efficiency Canada talk to us about energy poverty. It can affect anyone. And what are your thoughts on the energy poverty crisis in your part of Nova Scotia?
Yeah, it's quite striking, actually. So in December 2023, Efficiency One, which is the Nova Scotia version of Efficiency Canada, give or take,
Right.
they released a study of energy poverty in Nova Scotia. And one of the things they found was that 9 of the 10 communities that have the highest rates of energy poverty in our whole province are in Cape Breton, particularly in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, which is where we work. And in those 9 communities, rates of energy poverty ranged from 57% to 85% of households living with energy poverty. And so, as we have taken a look at the interventions we want to make, reducing energy poverty among our tenants has been a big motivator. And so, as we look at new and contemporary affordable housing projects, one of the things we realize is that although you can make rents affordable, unless you attend to that question of utility cost, living situations can still be quite unaffordable for families and tenants. And so here in Nova Scotia, we have a single utility provider, which means that um, we have very little control over the cost of utilities, the rate at which that cost increases, and how much it increases by. And so part of our hope is, we'd really like to be part of both the renewables transition, but having the renewables transition also be a transition towards community ownership of energy, so that as communities begin to own their own energy assets, we have a diversification of ownership, and that ownership can be driven by different objectives than profit alone. It can be driven by the desire to reduce or eliminate energy poverty. And so, one of the projects in particular that we have just wrapped up, among our residential property holdings, we own an 80-acre community. And so this community right now is comprised of 28 homes, a series of community buildings, and we do supportive housing on a large scale for adults with intellectual and physical disabilities there. And so we began in 2018 transitioning that property to net zero through retrofits and renewables. And at the tail end of the project, when we look back and we ask ourselves, what has the economic impact been on the residents of this community? What we see is that before we started, the average monthly utility bill was $368 a month. After the retrofits and renewables, the average monthly utility bill is about $125 a month.
That's great. Very impressive.
Yeah. And so when that's $2,500 a year for
Yeah.
families and seniors, students and newcomers, it does make quite a difference in the monthly income that they have available to them.
For the energy transition, as you're moving towards this new goal of net zero and the transition, what have been the benefits so far that you've seen?
Yeah, multiple. So of course, there's the cost savings for tenants in our residential buildings. One of the very kind of practical, technical outcomes of this transition, as we've moved tenants away from oil heating and towards heat pumps, we're able to offer better climate control, dehumidification, and air conditioning, which tenants previously didn't have. And historically, Cape Breton Island was not a terribly warm place. There would be about 2 weeks every summer, last week of July, first week of August, where we would get temperatures in the high 20s, early 30s. This last summer, Sydney, Nova Scotia set the record in Canada for the number of days breaking previous heat records. So we had a 6-week heat wave this year, which makes air conditioning increasingly important, both in our residential and our community and commercial buildings. So we've been able to add air conditioning for folks as we've made this transition. And then For us as a nonprofit, um, we are ever balancing our financial foundation and our social mandate. And so we need to be incredibly fiscally responsible. And when we look across our organization at what our largest expense categories are, it includes staffing, utilities, and property tax. And so, two of the three don't have a lot of flexibility therein. We can't do much about our property taxes. Um, as a service organization, our staff are at the center of everything we do, but we can do something about the utility costs in our organization. And so we've seen in another project, another retrofit project that we've just wrapped up. Our offices are located in a 40,000 square foot building that was built in 1958. And when we acquired it in 2012, it was heated by the original 1958 oil fired hot water boiler system. No upgrades, still chugging along and just consuming incredible amounts of oil. And so we transitioned to the building last year, eliminated the oil, went to a heat pump system, replaced the windows, put on a new roof, and we have reduced our energy expenses. We've cut them in half. So we've gone from about $150,000 a year to $70,000 a year. And that includes the cost to add in air conditioning for tenants in that facility as well.
Very inspiring message, and process that you've gone through. What advice would you give to other social enterprises and nonprofits if they're exploring the transition to renewable energy?
When we started very early days back in like 2012, 2013, and our first energy efficiency intervention was adding heat pumps to some of our supportive housing units. And so we added 8 heat pumps, and at the time, because we didn't have any in-house expertise and it was more challenging, we're a pretty small community, and so even finding outside expertise and contractors who were familiar with heat pump installations at that time was a bit of a challenge. But we worked our way through, and since then have kind of just taken one bite at a time. And each time you take a bite, um, it's you're more confident in the work that you're doing. You amass over time some level of in-house expertise and contract management and renewables project management. And this transition for nonprofits, for charities, for social enterprises, there's just so much embedded benefit for the climate, for those that we serve, and for our organizations' operating performance. And we found, particularly over the last 5 years, 5 to 7 years, that at different levels of government, so local, provincial, and national, there is an increasing array of incentive programs and financing for renewables, which, 10 years ago was quite a sell. But as the technologies and adoption of the technologies becomes more commonplace, um, traditional financing through banks and credit unions becomes a bit of an easier undertaking, and then pairing that with the funding programs that governments are ever introducing to try to meet their own climate goals and targets. And so I think my advice would be just 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 get started. Just take a little bite to begin and see where that leads. As you wade through it, it tends to be a lot easier and a little less complex than you might imagine at the outset.
What's next for New Dawn Enterprises? What does the next year or so look like for the energy transition, what you're doing?
Yeah, well, we're having just wrapped up our first 700 kilowatt community solar array. So that array is 1,800 panels. We have a feasibility study for our next two arrays. In February, we opened a new 25 unit affordable harm reduction housing project. And so we've engineered the roof of this new building to be able to sort of accept solar in the near future. We're also at the very outset of building a new 26,000 square foot youth and family center in the community of Glace Bay, and working towards having an array ready to go for that facility when it opens in 2026. And as we've probed this climate question and these efficiency paths a little more, we've really been introduced to the world of passive design for new construction. And so where in the past we were doing a lot of retrofits of old buildings, it's been really exciting now to apply that same intention to how we're building new buildings. And so building incredibly energy efficient passive buildings that can be net zero from the outset when they're paired with solar. So that's as we look ahead and really continuing to advocate for affordable utilities. When we talk about affordable housing, those two have to go hand in hand, and that democratic transition away from how we've dealt with energy in the past as we transition to renewables, really wanting to see that not only benefit the climate, but benefit all of our community members equally.
It was wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your inspirational story of how you are transitioning your energy over to more efficient ways of doing it. Really great. And I hope this inspires other people and other organizations to follow your lead, and appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This has been so lovely. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later.
Great.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to stop recording. So that was Erika Shea. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for listening in or watching. This is the Reimagined Energy podcast. It's sponsored by Smart Energy Halifax. It's an energy conference that's held every April here in Halifax, and they have awesome speakers and topics, and I really think you should register because it's a really great informational event. I'm your host, Maria McGowan, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.